just going to flex, and just feel free to just sit at your seats. Dr. Shucker walks around a lot, and so if you want to move over here and take notes or whatever, just be comfortable. I know you guys who are still in line, we'll accommodate you. Hopefully we'll get you through here pretty fast. I had a bio prepared as an introduction because someone of Dr. Shucker's stature certainly deserves it. He told me not to do it because we need to get down to talking right now, so he will introduce himself. If you guys can give a warm Mitchell Road Christian Academy welcome to Dr. Harry Shucker from Furman University.
Thank you. Thank you. I will try to walk and talk at the same time, which will be difficult for me, but I do want to thank you for having me here today. I'm going to talk about something that probably all of you are aware of, but may not understand the ramifications of technology and social media in particular. Now, just a little bit about my background that is important. I worked at Furman University for 40 years, but I was VP for Student Services for 23 years. And so I got to know how 18 to 22-year-olds function. And sometimes I refer to Furman as an adolescent daycare center. I'm sure you all can understand that, or you will be able to understand that in a number of years. But two of my responsibilities involved, one, being responsible for the counseling center, and two, being responsible for health services. And so every student who was withdrawn from the university, either for medical reasons or for health issues, went through my office, and I was the intervener with the parents. Now, I can promise you there's nothing more devastating to parents than to have someone like myself call them and say, I'm sorry your son or daughter is not emotionally equipped to be at the university, and we have to withdraw them. So I decided that once I retired in 2008, that I would use what I learned at Furman to try to help parents understand where their son or daughter is in terms of grades, but also in terms of technology, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I know I have a lot of young parents in here, and I know a lot of young parents always think, well, hey, you know, I know how I was raised, I'm cool, I'm really involved in this area of technology, but I want to be honest with the young parents in here. You guys were raised a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. Be honest, when you're raising your children. And so we're going to talk about some of the differences I've seen, but I'm going to give you some illustrations about technology. And I put this slide up there on purpose because I want you to think about it in relationship to what I'm going to talk about. And I want you to know some things to frame the reference for you. Number one, this is the 10th anniversary of what? Anyone knows? It's the 10th anniversary of the invention of the iPad. Steve Jobs, Apple. And before Steve Jobs unfortunately passed away much too quickly, he was asked, Mr. Jobs, what do your children think of the iPad? And Steve replied, to be quite honest with you, I don't know, because I never allowed one in my household. Now that's really an alarming statement. Steve Jobs never allowed his children to be on an iPad. That's kind of part of what we're going to frame about our discussion. There are reasons Steve Jobs never allowed his children an iPad, and I'm going to share those with you. Secondly, I'm always asked, oh, Dr. Shucker, what's a good age to let my children or my child have smartphones? You know, should they be 7? Should they be 8? Should they be 10? What is the appropriate age? Another frame of reference is Bill and Melinda Gates never allowed their children to have smartphones until they were 14. So they were running around as a 7-year-old or an 8-year-old with a smartphone in their hand. And there are reasons Bill and Melinda Gates did that, and we'll talk about those today. But I'm going to start with the premise of that, and I don't have to read these two, you can read them yourselves, but the misuse of technology promotes the only legally and socially approved addictive behavior in our society. Now, please understand, I'm not against technology, but I am against the misuse of technology. And let me give you 4 examples of what can happen when you have the misuse of technology. I was doing one of these programs for one of the elementary schools here in Greenville, and a mother came up to me afterwards and said, "Dr. Shucker, I can't have a civil conversation with my 3rd grader." And I said, I'm going to use this as a prop. Excuse me? Are you be all right without it? Okay, jump out. Good. Just want to check, because if I take a cell phone away from somebody, it might cause a meltdown. So anyhow, she stopped me after. She says, "Dr. Shucker, how can I reach my 3rd grader?" And I said, "Well, I have a suggestion for you. When you sit down and talk with your 3rd grader the next time, have the older brother out of the house, and have your husband out of the house, and just you and the 3rd grader sit down and talk." "Okay, I'll try it, Dr. Shucker." And we kept an email correspondence. And she said, "I'm a bright person, Dr. Shucker. I went to college, I finished #1 in my class, I was Phi Beta Kappa, but I can't understand this." And so she took my advice, and she got together, and the 3rd grader, after school, husband was out of the house, the older brother was out of the house. She said, "Why can't you and I have a civil conversation? Why do you always get up, get angry, and run out of the room in tears?" And talking to a Phi Beta Kappa mother, he picks up her cell telephone and says, "Because when I'm talking to you, you're always on this phone." Now, at the end of the week, she'll go in and put him to bed, and she'll say, "Oh, give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down how I did with talking to you one-on-one." Another illustration. How many times, and I don't even have to give you the illustration, you can guess what it is. How many times you go in a restaurant, you see a family of 4 sitting there, and the parents are on their cell phones, and the kids are on their cell phones, right? Now, they may be texting each other, but they're texting. They're not talking. So you go into a beautiful outdoor setting, and you're at a restaurant, and you see a family of 3 come in with a 5-year-old, a family of 2, and the 5-year-old with them. They sit down and have lunch. The 2 parents take out their cell telephones. They hand the 5-year-old an iPad, and there's no conversation during the entire meal. 5 years from now, those parents are going to wonder, why doesn't our daughter want to talk to us? I don't understand this. Well, see, they're sending a subtle message. One is, we don't want to spend time with you, and 2, this is more important than you are. Like the 3rd grader, this is more important than you are. Third illustration of what technology can do. I was talking at Eastside High School, and a mother raised her hand halfway through the discussion. She said, "Dr. Shucker," she said, "my daughter is so anxious. I really have a hard time dealing with her. She is so anxious about everything." And I said, "Well, I think probably part of the problem is because she spends too much time on this." And the mother said, "Well, you know, we try to take it away from her, but she just becomes more anxious." Well, see, what that parent has done is they've set up a cycle. They've handed her an iPhone at a very young age, let her play on it, and it sets up a cycle. And so consequently, this becomes her best friend. I'll take it one step further. You have a set of parents who have a daughter who's really, again, attached to her phone. They take the phone away from her, and she starts cutting herself. Because emotionally, if you can't express yourself, then you do it physically. So because she's cutting herself, they give the phone back to her. But then they can't stand the way she's acting, and so they take it away from her again. So then she threatens to kill herself, threatens suicide. So they take her to a psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist has about a 20-minute interview with her, and he looks at the parents and says, "You won't be able to break her of her addiction to this. You will have to go into an in-treatment patient center to break your daughter from her addiction to her cell phone." Now, if you go on the web, you will see internet addiction clinics popping up all over the United States. and it's because it's an addiction. And that's what I want to expand on just a second. The addictions that probably all of us are familiar with, one would be, of course, tobacco. That was big in my day, in the 1960s. Y'all have seen the series called Mad Men. They're all smoking. And you know the tobacco companies knew that nicotine was addictive, but they weren't going to tell anybody because it was going to hurt their product. So in order to really make their product sell, they even started to make flavored cigarettes. Well, my premise on addiction is that it can cause difficulties in individuals, wreak havoc in families, and lead to tragedy. Certainly tobacco can wreak havoc in individuals. It can wreak havoc in families because someone gets sick with cancer, and it creates tragedy. You will see people who are diagnosed with lung cancer smoking because it's an addiction. The misuse of alcohol. Alcohol by itself is not addictive. But if a child grows up in an alcohol family where alcohol is present all the time, it's misused by the parents, then they become, oh, I'm just going to try this alcohol. I'm going to try it. I'm going to keep trying it. And eventually your brain gets used to the pleasant sensations of alcohol, and it starts to become an abuse. Can it wreak havoc in individuals? Certainly. In families? Certainly. Can it lead to tragedy? Certainly. Drunk driving kills how many people? What's extremely important for you all is that you're all raising young children, and what you have to understand is that their neurological connections are forming all the time. All the time. As you're sitting here, as this little child's sitting over here, they're forming neurological connections all the time. Your brain doesn't mature until you're 21 years of age or in that area. Sometimes my wife says, I'm never matured. But it doesn't maintain until you're 21 or older. So you have to understand that you hand this to a 6-year-old, you're influencing how his brain is developing. The neurological connections are being made. Use of opioids. Everyone is familiar with opioids, the tragedy that opioids can create. But let's take the misuse of technology. Can it create havoc in individuals? Obviously. If you become so addicted to your phone, you can't put it down. Can it wreak havoc in families? Obviously, because you have family going into counseling because their daughter is suicidal if you take her phone away from her. And lastly, can it create tragedies? What is the most frequent cause of accidents today? Anybody know what it is? Distracted driving. That is the #1 cause of accidents in the United States, is distracted driving. Now, the government steps in tobacco, the government steps in alcohol, the government steps in opioids, and now the government has decided, wait, perhaps we shouldn't text while we're driving. Perhaps we shouldn't be in the cell phones when we're driving. I was coming down the road the other day, and this woman was coming toward me, and she was looking down, was texting with one hand and trying to make a left-hand turn with her other hand. I'm going like, lady, you're going to get killed or you're going to get somebody else killed. But all of us are rational human beings. We know we shouldn't be texting when we're driving, but we do it anyhow. So the premise I'm going to talk about today is that technology, the misuse of it, is addictive. And the earlier your children start into it, the more it's going to become addictive to them. And I'll give all of you a homework assignment. I know Jennifer didn't say there was any homework, but there is one homework assignment right now. I'd like you to go a full day in your car with your phone in the seat and never touch it. And see if you could do that. It's a challenge to you. Have it ride around with you in the car, but never touch it. Don't text. Don't look at it when it dings. Don't respond to it. So this is what we're seeing in college, and you will see it as your children get older. I won't read it to you, but you can read it. And that is so true. adolescents today, young people today, anxiety and depression are going out of the roof among young people. And a lot of it has to do with the stimulus, the cauldron of stimulus they're caught in. A woman in 2010 gave a TEDx talk on the wonders of technology in young people. She said it was the greatest thing that ever happened to young people. In 2013, she gave the same talk saying, technology is the worst thing that's ever happened to young people. In 3 years, it's the worst thing that ever happened to young people. Part of the difficulty is that you're raising children and you're in the same thing as they live in an age of immediacy. Everything to them is immediate. They get immediate feedback on video games. Oh, look, I made the next level in this video game. Or Facebook. Oh, I can go on there and connect with 6 million people. Or Snapchat, speed filler. And while we're doing it, does everyone know what Snapchat is? Good. If not, I'll explain it. That's okay. Instagram, Twitter, text messaging, emails, laptops, iPads. Everything in their world is immediate. They live in the world of immediacy. You give a 7th grader, a 6th grader, a 5th grader, a 7-year-old this, and everything in their world becomes immediate to them. These statistics come from across the country, from counseling centers. And the two fastest growing categories are depression and anxiety. And anxiety is going out of the roof with a lot of our young people. 47% of those people seen in the counseling centers are there for anxiety as one of the difficulties they're facing. 40% are there for depression. And I've been in this job for a long time, and in 1985, when I took over as VP for Student Services, we had 1 counselor. Now we have 5 counselors, and we have a psychiatrist on staff. 380 centers across the United States located in different college campuses provide psychiatric services. Those who don't refer off campus. So it's a problem that all of us in higher education are concerned about. I had lunch with a young woman the other day who's a 20-year-old sophomore who wants to go into counseling. And she works at an eating disorder clinic down here in Greenville. And she's going to do an internship in Nashville, Tennessee this summer. And she doesn't know what I talk about. And she said to me, she said, Doc Shucker, one of the things I'm worried about in going into counseling is that my friends can't put this down for more than a minute or two so we have a decent conversation. She said, I'm really concerned about addiction to electronic devices. And I said, guess what I talk about, Emily? This is what Furman did. Up to 5 full-time staff. We have our psychiatrist on campus. She has friends at Samford University down in Birmingham, Alabama, and their counseling staff is overwhelmed. They can't provide enough counseling, as is true across the United States for young people. So, this is the beginning of it. You can read that. You have to understand that 8-year-old is forming neurological connections all the time. And what's happening in that 8-year-old is his sense of pleasure, his dopamine, is tied to what happens with the electronic device. It's tied to the games he plays. It's tied to the things he sees. And basically, he became addicted to it. And this is not just an isolated case. Now, when you read that, you start to get an idea of, oh, maybe Steve Jobs knew something about an iPad that we don't know as a society. His children were never allowed to use iPads. Let's talk about Snapchat and speed filter. If you're not familiar with it, your young people will be, if they aren't already. Snapchat was invented by a fellow at Stanford who came up with a brilliant premise. He was right. Young people like to do things, but they don't want anybody to remember that they've done those things. So Snapchat is where you can take a picture of someone with a cell phone, and I'll give this back to you if you're anxious. Okay. You can take a picture of someone with your cell phone, you can send it to someone else. As soon as they open it, it will disappear in 10 seconds. So you can photograph any funny things you want to, any ridiculous things you want to, send it to someone, and if it opens, it'll disappear after 10 seconds. It'll stay on that phone 24 hours until it disappears, completely whether you open it or not. It was invented on the premise that, of course, young people like to engage in outlandish behavior. Now, if you can imagine this, 800 million, get a hand around that, 800 million Snapchats are sent a day by young people in the United States. Can you imagine how much time that takes of young people? Can you imagine the anxiety of making sure you snap what you want to snap and send it to your friends? And the last fella said he has 1 million followers, and he bet someone within half an hour he could have 100,000 responses. In half an hour of sending a Snapchat, within 60 minutes of sending a Snapchat, he had 142,000 responses. That means that 142,000 people are carrying this phone around with them and looking at it constantly. Now, you don't think that causes anxiety? You don't think that makes people anxious? But you should have enough self-control to be able to put this down. But obviously, many people do not have that ability to do that. Let's talk about speed filter for a second. This is one you also need to become aware of. And you know, by the time your children get to be 18 and driving, it may no longer be there. But right now, speed filter is there. And if you take a picture of a person going 120 miles an hour in a car, the GPS on Snapchat will calculate the speed between 2 points of reference. So if your son or daughter is out driving and they take a picture here and they take a picture 5 seconds later, the GPS will say, well, that person was going 120 miles an hour. Well, that's probably cool to an 18-year-old, but it's not so cool when 5 miles down the road they kill a family of 4 in a station wagon, 3 children and a mother. So you have to be very, very aware of what your children are doing when you give them this. A streak on Snapchat. Where's Jennifer? Jennifer. Let's say Jennifer and I are Snapchat buddies, okay? I send Jennifer a picture, and as soon as I send her one, she sends me one back. And on Snapchat, that starts a streak. We've got a streak going. And so a flame lights up on Snapchat. And as long as Jennifer and I send pictures back and forth to each other within 24 hours, that flame keeps burning. So all of a sudden, Jennifer and I want to, I don't want to break the streak now. Do you want to break the streak, Jennifer? No, you don't want to break the streak, right? So we keep doing it for several days in a row. And all of a sudden, neither one of us wants to break the streak. And this flame sits besides the pictures that come in and out. And if Jennifer doesn't respond to me within 24 hours, within 10 minutes of it expiring, the flame starts to go out, starts to extinguish itself. Well, that creates a great deal of anxiety in Jennifer because she knows she wants to keep the streak going. So she fires it back to me. Anybody want to guess what the longest streak is between two people? Yeah, just put out a number. How many days? 60? 100? 200? How many? 2,000? Close. 836 days Jennifer and I kept our streak going. That's more than 2.5 years. You don't think that creates anxiety in people? Drives me crazy just thinking about it. So, anxiety and depression. There's a woman out in California. She's written a book called Resetting Your Child's Brain. And she has dealt with about 1,000 children who come to her with the condition of being addicted to their electronic device. And that happens because the electronic device sets up these pleasure systems in young children. And it's like taking an alcohol away from an alcoholic. The Hazelden Betty Ford Clinic treats not only what they call IAD, internet addiction, they also treat alcohol addiction. And it's interesting in that brain scans of people who are addicted to alcohol and people who are addicted to technology are almost the same, because their neurological connections have changed to emphasize alcohol and technology. Internet addiction, technology addiction is real, and it's only going to get worse unless you as parents understand why Steve Jobs never gave his children an iPad, and Bill Gates never gave his children a smartphone until they were 14. So what happens to young people who get addicted to technology? Obviously, they get overstimulated. I mean, when I speak to student groups and I say, okay, I'm going to talk for the next 40 minutes, you got to talk, turn off your phone. It's like, oh, do we have to turn off our phone? Yes, you have to turn off your phone. If you allow your child to have this before they go to bed, they will never go to bed because the blue lights will keep them awake. Bill and Melinda Gates take all technology away from their children 1 hour before bed. Takes the place of personal conversations. Destroys critical thinking. Oh, look, I can take a picture of my cat drinking out of my dog's bowl. Click. Does it create Facebook and internet addiction? Obviously it does. I have a friend at Michelin who had to fire 2 people recently because they were addicted to the internet and Facebook. They couldn't get off of it. He had to fire both of them. And of course, we all know the inappropriate content that appears on the internet. The misuse of technology in the wrong way can be devastating to individuals and can be devastating to individuals as well as families. But let's talk about it from a parent standpoint. Notice the way the cell phone is facing. Away from the child and toward the parent. And that's exactly what that 3rd grader was telling his mother. Talk to me. Don't talk to this when I'm trying to talk to you. And this question is directed to you about addiction. Second homework assignment. Go home tonight, keep on the sound notification on this thing so you know something's coming in, but put it down on the table, and the first time something dings, see if you can go 30 minutes without looking at it. Prove it to yourself that you can actually do 30 minutes without reaching to see what happened. That's a test. Now, this is the sad part. Remember the tobacco addiction? So Silicon Valley knows exactly what they're doing to manipulate all of us with this. If you had 2,000 people stand outside of a meth clinic and want meth, you'd get, oh, that's terrible. Oh, that's horrible. They're addicted. But you have 2,000 people waiting for the new Apple phone. Oh, that's not a problem. So the test is, let this thing ding for 30 minutes before you look at it. Put it face down and just see if you can do that tonight. That'll be a challenge, I promise you. Really? If you're expending so much mental and emotional energy every time you open up Facebook, why do you waste your time on Facebook? I mean, rationally, you would say to yourself, well, why am I looking at Facebook if I'm going to get so emotionally tired of looking at Facebook? You're never going to change anybody's opinion on Facebook. Now, I would think being a mother of four would leave you frustrated and angry without looking at Facebook. I may be wrong, but I would think that would be true. And letting that on a little bit longer, because I want the message to sink in. I'm not preaching, but I'm really being honest with you. That woman is never going to reclaim the 5 years with her children. She's never going to reclaim the 5 years in her life. All the time you spend on Facebook, you're never going to reclaim that time. All that time that mother was trying to be on this where that third grader was getting angry and upset, she's never going to reclaim that time. It's gone forever. It's kind of a funny slide, but it's so true. Now, in our society, well, when I was growing up in the Dark Ages, if I did something that was stupid, or if I did something that, I didn't want a whole lot of people to know about, or if my next door neighbor, which is a true story, who was valedictorian of the class, Jeannie Krause, her name was, if Jeannie made all A's that year, my parents never knew that, except that they knew she was valedictorian of the class. Now, you get into a world of comparisons. You go on Facebook, oh, look, my child made all A's. Or look, why is that child having so much fun at that party when I'm not at that party? How comes I don't look as good as she does? How comes I'm not vacationing in Aruba like this family is? We all now start to live in an age of comparisons. Why isn't my son or daughter in this gifted program? Because my friend's son or daughter is in this gifted program. But what people don't realize is this is your child. It's not their child, it's your child. Everyone's different. But we live in an age of comparison. Now, where that really hits home is the really ugly part of the misuse of technology. I was talking with the headmaster. He has 2 daughters. This is not a laughing matter, but I was telling him what's going on. Let's take the top one, sexting. Sending sexually explicit texts. Now, the first thing I would say to you as parents is, no matter how much you might think when you raise your children that the look at their phone, to look at their phone is an invasion of privacy, it is not an invasion of privacy. You paid their phone, it's your phone. You're nice enough to give it to them to use. I did this program for First Baptist Church Kindergarten last year. And we had this discussion among parents. One parent said, no, I will never check my teenage daughter's phone because it's an invasion of her privacy, and I trust her enough not to do that. A year later, she came up and said, you know, Dr. Shucker, you're right. I now check my daughter's phone for everything. She turns off that locating service, and I check her phone and call her and turn it on, tell her to turn it on. Sexting. I was at Travelers Rest doing this for a Baptist Sunday school class, and a mother, 8th grade mother, raised her hand and said, my daughter's already been requested to get involved in a sexting group in the 8th grade. And luckily, that daughter brought that concern to her mother. So one of the things I definitely want you to do is keep that lines of communication open with your children. Mother did that with the daughter, and she was fortunate. Cyberbullying can start as early as the 5th grade, where people get together and they gang up on someone in the class through this, using of this. And to take it to extremes, there have been students in college who have committed suicide because they were cyberbullied on this phone. Issues never end in social media. And issues don't ever end in social media. That's what makes this generation so anxious and depressed. Because everything that goes on social media turns out to be a comparison. Why am I not at that party? Why am I not being involved in this group? Why? And it becomes a question of who they are. So one of the things I also ask you as parents to do is work with your children so you understand where their self-esteem level is, where their self-image is. They understand who they are. Because once they get involved in this terrible confusion of social media, you can tend to lose your identity, tend to lose who you are, tend to lose what you stand for. I still keep in touch with the folks in my counseling center. I was talking to Steve Dawes, who used to chair my counseling center. He now works part-time at Furman. I said, Steve, what's the most difficult thing you see? And he says, I see children that are caught in this ever-vicious circle of technology and social media. It keeps them in a constant state of anxiety. Now, I'll give you a very graphic thing about what can happen, and probably happens more often than I know or you know, is that there was a young woman who was a freshman at the University of Pennsylvania, ran cross country, beautiful young woman, made a 3.6 at the University of Pennsylvania, which, you know, it's equivalent to an Ivy League school, 3.6. But her friends were making 4.0s, and they would post it on social media. And she started to question who she was and what she was all about. Then she looked at different social medias and, oh, I wasn't invited to this party at the University of Pennsylvania. Why wasn't I invited? So at age 19, the last note she wrote her parents was, Dear Mom and Dad, I'm lost. I don't know who I am anymore. And she jumped off the 3rd floor of a parking building, killed herself at 19. This is the world they live in. It's the world your children are going to live in. It may be the world they live in now. That's why Bill Gates didn't give his child a phone until they were 14, until he had a long talk about their maturity level in dealing with things that are on the phone. There was a study done by a number of prominent schools in New England, medical schools. 46,000 homes were studied. The average child spends 8 hours a day in front of a screen. 8. 8 hours a day in front of a screen. They found that the ability to do difficult tasks decreased as the number of screen hours increased. And that makes sense to you. You think that this is making a child switch gears maybe every 30 seconds, maybe every minute, maybe every 2 minutes. They're constantly switching gears between texting, the internet, email, Twitter, Snapchat. I've got to keep my streak alive. And parents who saw improvements in grades, sleep, and all help children manage the use of this. I love the families who at 7 o'clock at night come in and say, okay, we're going to have dinner together, going to be any electronic devices, and then we're going to put all these in a basket. And they don't come out until 8 o'clock the next morning. Because if you allow a student to take this to bed with them, they'll text 24 hours a day. That's just the way it is. So I would caution you to be very, very vigilant in terms of going down the road, how you deal with the electronic devices your children are involved. So I'll go back to what I'm saying. If you allow your son or daughter to misuse technology and don't put interventions in there, you'll have a son or daughter that's addicted to technology. And you'll have a son or daughter that's going down a road that you will not be able to change. It's much easier to step up in technology than it is to step down in technology. For example, I had a mother speak the other day, and she's given her daughters cell phones, but she puts very strict parameters on it. You can use it for 15 minutes a day, and that's it. And then when she upped it to 30 minutes a day, they were so excited they couldn't stand it. Oh, I can use it for 30 minutes a day. But if you give it to them for 8 hours a day, and then you try to back it down to 6 hours a day, you're going to have a battle on your hands. A battle you may not win. So it's easier to step up technology than it is to step down technology. Now I'm at a point where I'm going to close this presentation, but I want to close it with something that really caught my attention, and I think it's so well done, and I believe this is the correct slide. I've lost my track, but I believe this is the correct slide. This next slide was put together and was used by the student council, 4th and 5th graders at one of our elementary schools here in Greenville County. Now, these are 4th and 5th graders. This is not parents. This is 4th and 5th graders putting this next sign together. No, it's not. I'm sorry. Wrong slide. Let's talk about this just a second, then I'll show you that slide. First of all, and I'm going to give you these when you go out, right, Jennifer? I want you to be a good role model in this change agent of technology. Be a change agent. As individuals, you set the guidelines for your family. It doesn't matter that Susie Q can use her phone 44 hours a day. You set the guidelines for your family. You set the age when electronic devices are appropriate. Bill Gates didn't give his daughters 14 till they were 14, despite all the constant whining they did. Be available to your child rather than pushing them away for the electronic device. Thank you. Electronic devices should be turned off 1 hour. Screen time before sleep never works. And the last one is a proven fact. If you get a child out in nature, Paris Mountain State Park, going outside, playing, their brains de-stress. They turn off those centers that are giving them pleasure, and they get outside and they do something different. They change their mindset. So get your child out of the house. Don't pick them up from school. So they can watch it going home from school. You stay on your cell phone. Don't do that. That's not what you want to do with your children. Now, This was put together by 4th and 5th graders at his elementary school. And it was a student council project. Now, to me, it's sad when 4th and 5th graders have to talk to parents and tell them, look, we want to talk to you, don't ignore us. But in this age of technology with cell phones, you can't believe the number of parents that will pick up their children, put them in the back seat, and never say hello to them, just continue doing what they're doing on electronic devices. And you cannot do that to children. Or you'll have the absence of, the example of a 3rd grader whose mother can't talk to him because he's so angry by the way she treated him. Children are tremendously insightful. And if you prefer that electronic device over them, it will come back to haunt you 1,000-fold. So don't do that, please, as parents. Put that in the right perspective. What's more important, answering a text or talking to your child when they come out of school? Think about that. Okay, we've close to our deadline here. Do you have any questions? I'll be glad to answer them for you. If you want to talk to me privately, that's true. But if you have any questions from the audience, the best thing about this is that parents compare notes most times. So if you have questions, please give them now. Anything at all? Yes, please.
Okay, so let's talk about like a tablet or an iPad.
Talk about a tablet or iPad.
Is that like our kids? We have very limited games. They don't have access to internet,
Don't have access to internet.
but we're still letting them play like 15, 20 minutes a day. So is that still like just? I mean, they do seem addicted to that. Like
Right.
they're like, can we play a tablet? Can we play a tablet? But like if they're exposed to social media, then obviously that increases the anxiety.
It does.
Right, but playing those limited amounts of games, is that also creating?
Yes. Long story short, yes. You give them that and you create that anxiety over playing that game, like that 8-year-old. That's starting that addictive pattern where, okay, we may limit 15, 20 minutes now, but what's going to happen a year from now? It's going to be half an hour? An hour? That's a concern.
Do you see a difference in like old school video games on a TV, like where you're just sitting there playing, as opposed to a handheld device, or is it all like any of that?
It is, but see, in those old days, where you had the handheld devices, and, that became tiresome after a while. But if you sit there in front of a screen, an iPad, and you're just touching it, that's a different mode of operation for your brain. It ramps up the anxiety on that. It's like, and I hate to, I don't want to sound judgmental, but be honest with you, I had a mother the other day said, well, when we go out and we have a 2.5-year-old, we like to give her an iPad so she'd be as quiet during a meal when we go out. Well, when we raised children, we gave them crayons to play with. And we didn't give them an iPad and say, here, entertain yourself in front of a screen. So I think it's what we do with our children that manifests itself long term. And that's so important. But that's a good question. But yes, I think anything like that hyper makes that brain become hyper, yes, that's starting a technology problem that you don't want to go there if you can help it. Other questions? Yes?
A lot of people don't have landlines.
Right.
And so that's where I'm feeling the pressure with kids having phones is because, that's how they all got them. It's like, well, all my kids have phones. Nobody has a home number anymore.
But you have a cell phone at home, right? You have what do they need a phone for besides calling home?
Well, play dates, they're older. So, getting together, it's your small group's going to do
Yeah.
stuff. That kind of stuff.
That's not good. That would be fine. But it's when the maturity level takes them to other areas that you don't want them to go to. Do you check their phones? You may want to think about doing that. Because it's like this mother said, I trust my daughter explicitly, but she's 17. So she checks it almost every day. I would not allow my teenager to have a phone that I did not check, to be honest with you. I don't mean to harsh, but I wouldn't do it. Other questions? Yes? Please. Right. I think Melinda and Bill used that as an age when they thought their daughters were mature enough. I think it was more maturity level than an age level. And I think they thought at 14 they were mature enough to handle what was coming down the pike. But I think if they gave them to them at 10, they wouldn't have done it. 12, whatever. They thought 14 was, for their daughters, the appropriate age. I don't think it's a magic number. I think it's a maturity level. Other questions? Yes?
How do you address the increased use of technology in education, which is a good thing?
Right.
My daughter is, constantly on there, creating study apps, stuff like that. But then they're susceptible to the pinging of text or Snapchat or whatever.
Right.
How do you balance it?
Well, I think technology is fine for educational use. I have no problems with the use of technology, and I have no problems with this technology if there are limitations on it. Okay, you can use this for an hour, but you don't have to be connected 24 hours a day to your friends down the road. I think that's the way I respond to it. But I think it's a fine line of what you have to decide in terms of working with your son or daughter, whether they can turn that off for 3 hours and be comfortable. If they can't turn it off for 3 hours and be comfortable, then there's a problem, to be honest with you. I mean, I don't know how I lived in the 60s and didn't have a phone. I survived. Please.
Well, but he was saying that they're using these for classrooms a lot.
Right, they are.
Oh, well, I've got to do, my school, I've got to do the schoolwork off of it. But the constant text and, just alerts, notifications
Right.
are coming in while they're, if you're letting them use it for school. So it's not just, they're still, they're not unplugged at all. They're not even just doing their schoolwork. It's
Right.
that constant.
And that's very difficult. And I agree with both of you. Excuse me? I think that's something you have to trust your son or daughter with. I think when it becomes a situation that they become so anxious because these texts be coming in that they can't concentrate on their homework, then I think it's a problem. But I think you have to be very conscious of how much time they're spending doing that versus how much time they're doing homework versus texting. I think you have to be conscious of that. But it is, I guarantee you, and I say this to every group I talk to, and I'll say it to you before I leave, you guys are raising children in the most difficult generation ever, bar none. Your young people are going to be susceptible to more things 5 years from now than we can even think of in this room at this point. So you have more challenges probably than any generation that are dealing with children, period. Any other questions? Yes, please.
Well, I appreciate that you talk about parents too. I have an addiction on my phone without a doubt. It's been very difficult for me to sit here for an hour and not touch it.
Right.
Look at it.
To look at, right.
So, and I can see that in my children when I'm not monitoring their screen time.
Yeah.
It's the same.
It is. It's the same thing.
For us to go into our phones for a little while and away from one another. So
It is. It starts at home. That's right. It starts with you all as a technology kind of examples for children. But that's what Silicon Valley understands. They understand that completely. And they're never going to run short of selling phones because they make us addicted to them. Excellent point. Yes. Yes.
we got rid of ours, and then I just at the time was ready to get my children cell phone yet, so we got a 99-cent flip phone.
Ah, right.
And we have it there in case of emergency, or if my son goes down the street to play at his neighbor's house, I give it to him in a little pouch, call me when we get
Right.
there, and that's worked out great. On the other hand, when my older son, who is almost 13, we still don't have a phone for him yet, I
Right.
always thought by the time he's 13, I'll probably get him one. We're almost there. He's not ready.
You're not ready for it.
And however, with that being said, he has this little flip phone when he goes to youth group, and everybody else is pulling out their iPhones and they're all playing a game which requires the iPhone app, and then he ends up being ridiculed or made fun of because he has a flip phone, so that's kind of what we're struggling with, and also at school with
It is.
We need to give them probably another year, but, you know.
That is difficult, and I'm not selling that short. It is. That's the peer pressure of, look what everybody else says, why don't I have one? But that magnifies itself as you go down the road. And so I think, flip phones are fine because really what do you need to do except call home? But they're used for so many different things except for what they should be used for sometimes. So I think it's a maturity level, whether they can handle a smartphone or not. But just because Susie Q and Johnny Sink has one doesn't mean your son has to have one. You're raising him in your own home. And it's like on Facebook. You always see, oh, look, my son or daughter got straight A's, right? But you never see, oh, my son and daughter had to withdraw from school. That's never posted on Facebook. Or my son or daughter had a nervous breakdown. Oh, that's not posted on Facebook. So, oh my God. So Facebook becomes a huge comparison for people. But as a student said, 99% of Facebook has no connection to reality. You're probably right. 99% has no connection to reality. Other questions? Yes?
In your opinion, is Kindle detrimental or even reading a book on the
Reading a book online is fine. It's when you hyper that nervous system, trying to punch everything, that starts that connection which is unhealthy. Video games is a huge component of the difficulties with the addiction to the iPad. I mean, you got a woman who has 1,000 people coming to her children trying to reset their child's brain. It's a huge problem. And if you have a child who's ADHD or ADD and you take that electronic device away from them, it's amazing how those symptoms lessen. The fastest growing diagnosis among children is ADHD. You take that electronic device from them and it calms those symptoms down. It may not get rid of them, but it calms them down. So, other questions? Yes? It's like a therapy. It's almost like an addiction reset. You step down from technology, and if they're doing it 8 hours a day, you bring it down to 6. It's slowing withdrawal. It's like if they're an inpatient treatment center. The book is called Resetting Your Child's Brain by Victoria Duckley, and that's how they do it. But unless you understand what's going on with the child, you don't understand that, by the time they're 8, these neurological connections are going all the wrong ways. Any other questions? Yes?
I'm not very tech savvy.
Oh.
I'm concerned about this. Some days I'm good, but I know there are some different products or apps
Right.
and things out there that help me. It's hard for me to monitor. I think 2 kids and phones in my phone.
Right.
And things like that are on the router of your home. I just read about all these things, but again, I'm not very tech savvy, so I've never gone on to apply that. So is there a company or a brand or a website that you think, that's good quality age monitoring?
That's a good question. The question was, what can I do with my child's phone or my phone or combination of such that will monitor what my child can look at or not look at on their phone, the internet? There are certain products that are out. I'm not an authority on those, but I know a number of parents use them. A number of parents can block what goes onto a child's phone. They are even now advanced to where the child cannot use their phone if they're driving in a car. If they're driving, the phone automatically shuts off until they stop driving. So there are lots of products you can use, but you have to really go on the internet and see what suits you the best. Disney puts out one, for example. Disney puts out one that lets things come in the phone only that's appropriate for a certain age. Any other parents have ideas on that? What products might be used to kind of monitor the phone? Yes? Okay. Circle. Excuse me, I said it again, please. Oh. It's called Circle. Shuts down the phone at a certain appropriate time. Yes, please.
We have Nest
Oh, what's the name of it?
Net sanity.
Net. How what good?
Found a workaround. It's supposed to shut off at night, but she has figured out that if the app is still on,
Mhm.
but the internet connection cuts off, that particular app will still work.
Net sanity. Pretty soon it's going to be net insanity for all of you in here. I mean, you know, I'm glad I'm not raising children today. Let me tell you what, it would be a challenge that I don't know if I could do. Net sanity. Any other questions at all? Going back to the flip phone comment. My daughter and son have heard this talk ad nauseum. So when I come in the door, Dad, we don't want to hear it again, okay? But they have children. My daughter has a 6-year-old daughter. My son has a 9-year-old son. And this last night she said, Dad, don't talk to me about this again. I'm only buying my daughter a flip phone. That's all she's going to use, because you only have to use it to call home, you know, from her standpoint. That's all she's going to get. And she's already, the granddaughter's only 6, so she's thinking like down the road, that's all she's going to have. But anyhow, you guys have a challenge. There's no doubt about it. Any other questions? I've enjoyed being here. I hope I didn't. Yes, we have another question. Please.
So what would you say is a good time limit, or do you say no? None at all, those 3 months? I'm not saying all the time.
No.
But like, let's say if you're going to go video game or whatever,
Yeah.
tablet, like, do you say none? Do you say 20 minutes? Like, what do you think is a good?
Yeah, I think you must put a time limit on it. The father whose son at 8 years of age was hooked on the iPad, he started an iPad at 5, and he had unlimited time on it. So you have to limit it to each day. Okay, you can use it for 30 minutes today, and then that's it. The rest of the time you're outside. Well, I'm just using that as a figure. You have to decide. It's individual children will react differently. But if I was doing it, you know, when my grandson comes over the house, he has technology for 30 minutes, and then that's it. I don't care how much he moans. He's in my house. That's the guidelines we use. And he moans. Yes.
Do you think brain loss makes a difference for what game? Because I know some games, they're just literally going, like that ball game or whatever, and then other games, you know, there's more of them or something like that, where they're actually doing something. Does that matter?
I think it depends if the game, yeah, I think the games where you punch and try to, I think when you hyper-arouse that nervous system, what that woman is referring to, once you do that, you're starting neurological connections that are different. It depends the anxiety involved in the games. I mean, these kids have enough of anxiety just growing up, much less playing these stupid video games, let me tell you. Sorry. Any other questions? Yes.
One more.
I'll try.
Do you find that it's effective to have a talk like this with actual teenagers so that they can help modify and self-regulate? Like, oh my gosh, if I know this, that my brain is going to be rewired and like alcohol is brain brain.
Right.
Do you find that that helps them?
Depends on the teenager. Depends on the kind of relationship you have with the teenager. You know, this mother can sit down with a 16-year-old and say, guess what, we're changing the rules. I'm going to monitor your phone from now on. It depends on the kind of relationship you've got with a teenager, but it's worth a try. Oh, me having a talk with a group. I've done that once. I have done that once already. I've done it twice for schools. And the teenagers kind of sit there going, yeah, right. You know, it's like an old guy talking to, you know, these 16-year-olds. Now, I could do it when I was in a vice president's position because I was in a counseling center and I was talking to students. Now I'm no longer talking, I'm telling them, and they don't buy that anymore. But thank you for asking.
Well, starting with an adult.
Yeah.
Like us putting down the iPads, that's more effective than them trying to. I guess is what I'm asking.
Yes, because when I talk with groups of 200 students, and most of them are texting when I'm talking. So they're really not picking up on what I'm saying. No, it's better because you as a parent can always either step up their use of technology or you can step down their use of technology. It's easier to step it up than it is to take it back down. So that's the kind of talk I would have.
Let's give Dr. Shucker a round of applause. Thank you so much. I appreciate it very much. We know you all are busy. If we learn one thing today that helps us be a better parent, and we walk out better parents. And so thank you for the investment of your time. to give you an idea of some of the comments we were talking about for safeguards, that is something that is definitely on our radar. I was talking to Dr. Shucker about it. And so Officer Rick Floyd is going to come on November 30th, and he is going to talk about from a law enforcement perspective, and he's going to have some perspective on safeguarding. And so if you come across anything that you find is effective, or if you know any speaker that is really good on that, let us know. You can contact Jennifer. But that is something that is near and dear at our heart's level here at the school, if we can find some system of protection. So please let us know any ideas that you have. Guys, on your way out, Dr. Shucker has prepared a handout, recommendations for parents. Also, Jennifer has prepared a feedback form of any ideas or topics that you would like at a future Lunch and Learn. We're going to try to end up doing about one a month kind of a thing. We might do some podcasting and get those to you. But that's kind of it. Thank you so much for coming out today. Appreciate it. Have a great, wonderful day, and thank you again. Appreciate it, Dr. Shucker.